Farm Progress Broadcast presents This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry. Brought to you by Case IH. Solutions for every challenge. Equipment for every farm. Case IH, built by farmers.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us here for This Week in Agribusiness. I'm Mike Pearson. Last summer, Congress passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and while it wasn't a farm bill, it did make several changes to a lot of long-standing farm policies. Among them, price loss coverage and agricultural risk coverage, PLC and ARC, from the FSA. Joining us now for an update is Undersecretary Richard Fordyce of Farm Production and Conservation at the USDA. Undersecretary Fordyce, what all is changing here in these two big programs that farmers have gotten used to?
Well, Mike, first of all, it's good to be with you. And you did state, you made a pretty big statement that it's not a farm bill, but a lot of changes. And certainly that's the way we're looking at it, here at the Farm Production and Conservation Mission Area here at USDA. And there were significant changes to ARC and to PLC. And I think Congress, realized that this work was going to take a little bit of time because for the 2025 crop year, producers that are enrolled in ARC or PLC will receive the higher of the two once the calculations are made. The One Big Beautiful Bill did raise reference prices, which, I know a lot of commodities that fall under the ARC and PLC programs had been advocating for a long time to raise those reference prices. And I think that one of the larger undertakings that will happen here at USDA, specifically Farm Service Agency, is the addition of 30 million acres more of base acres. And again, that's another topic that, folks that have been advocating on Farm Bill legislation and Farm Bill language had asked that there be additional base acres added. That happened, as you said, in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Now comes the work to do the data digs, looking at planting history on farms, individual producers' farms, and that's being done at the local level. We've got to understand what the planting history are on those farms, and so quite a bit of an undertaking. And Mike, I'll give a shout out to the wonderful folks that work on behalf of American agriculture in those local Farm Service Agency offices. They're the ones that are undertaking this effort, and it is going to take a little bit of time. But what we're hoping is that at the end of this history dig to determine historical plantings, that we'll notify producers probably early fall, in the fall, that they would be eligible for additional base acres, and then we'll go through the process of adding those into those farms.
All right. And so I understand this deep dive, this historical dig that you're doing now, that is going to delay enrollment into ARC and PLC. Of course, that enrollment ordinarily would get started here in a week or so. It's going to be pushed back. Secretary, how much is that going to be pushed back?
I think that, in some previous interviews I have done, I think the later sign up was maybe looked at in a negative light. And we don't look at that as a negative at all. We're going to have a timely sign up for folks. There's no risk to producers that they would not be able to be signed up, but we're probably looking at early fall. Again, the big undertaking that we just talked about as far as adding those additional 30 million acres, that really needs to be done before a farmer has the opportunity to make those signups, whether in ARC or in PLC.
Absolutely. We want to be sure your staff has the time to do this right, make sure farmers are getting the best support they can. Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation, Richard Fordyce, thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you, Mike. Always good to be on.
Fight grease, dust, and contaminants on your equipment with a Hotsy pressure washer. Visit Hotsy.com to find a local dealer, and remember, nothing cleans like a Hotsy. For this week's market segment, we're joined by Craig Turner. He's a commodity broker with StoneX and host of the StoneX Grain and Oilseeds podcast. Craig, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Very exciting week, to say the least, with Monday's USDA reports on deck. Big changes to the corn crop, increased production. Craig, was the market taken by surprise?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were looking for lower yield. A lot of people we talked to and the surveys that we saw just suggested we'd be maybe a couple, maybe even 3 or 4 bushels lower. Did not happen. We're at a 186.5, plus the harvested acres increased. So we're at a 17 billion carryout. The good news is demand is still strong. The ethanol number was good this week. Exports are on pace to be 3.2 billion. There's a lot of incentive to feed, right, with the livestock market. So we also have a 16 billion use, which is important, to have there. But yeah, we still at a 2.2 billion carryout where we need to get to 1.6 to be considered tight. 600 million bushels excess in the system there. Yeah, that's a lot.
It's a lot, but it's not insurmountable. It's not an unovercomable stockpile. Craig, what are you watching then over the year in this corn market? How should producers be managing this December risk, if they should already?
No, they should be. I mean, we're trading around 450 in December on the futures. You get some rallies here. I mean, I think a lot of farmers can make that work. It won't be the greatest payday ever, right? But I think they can make it work. If we get some rallies closer to 5, which are definitely possible. It's not probable, at the moment, but it could certainly happen if the demand stays strong. If you get any kind of weather issues, they're having a 20 or 30 cent rally in corn either during planting or summer growing season. But to expect more than that is going to be a challenge with so much grain here now in the United States and also around the world.
All right, so keep your expectations in check as we get into this growing season. Craig, we did see winter wheat seedings reported on Monday as well. The Chicago wheat market seems to have held up a little better than corn this week. What did we learn for the wheat?
Okay, so with the wheat market, we were actually looking for a little bit lower on the wheat seedings. I was thinking maybe 31 or 32 million on the planted. It ended up being 33. Now we did lose about 500,000 acres in wheat. We thought it could have been closer to 1 million. What it does mean though for wheat, and it did hold up, is when you get close to $5 wheat, it's a very good support level for wheat. Just like $4 corn, just like $10 beans, they don't live down there forever, right? They usually pop back up because it'll drive demand. Okay. So that is one thing. But with the wheat market at, let's say, all wheat, when we see the May WASDE, is probably going to be around 44 to 45 million acres. And a trendline yield, we either stay the same or start drawing on stocks year after year. I think the market understands that. And I think that's why wheat was holding up a little bit better than we thought.
As you look for demand in the wheat market, you mentioned feed demand coming on the corn side. Can we see that spill into wheat, or should we be watching for export news?
Okay, both. When wheat is trading less than $1 over corn, it does look attractive, especially out west for feed. So that'll happen. We will see some of that. The major exporter stocks, while not tight, if you take the U.S. out of it, it is a little bit tighter. And when you go look at the foreign markets and their basis, like Canada, for example, has a very strong basis on spring wheat. And you see that trend around the world, which means it doesn't take a ton right now of extra demand to maybe start pushing demand back to the U.S., which is the world's residual supplier. So I know prices look low, and that report was not good. But it's not like we're 3 billion on corn or we're 1 billion carryout on wheat and we're flush everywhere. Yeah. What you need, though, for a rally right now is one good weather story or production issue to push things up. If not, we're going to be range bound for a while.
All right. Well, we'll be back with more from Craig Turner at StoneX right after this. Fight grease, dust, and contaminants on your equipment with a Hot Sea pressure washer. Visit hotsea.com to find a local dealer, and remember, nothing cleans like a Hot Sea. We're back for more market discussion with Craig Turner of StoneX. And Craig, we also saw some reports from the soybean market on Monday. Yields, again, little different than the trade was anticipating. What did we learn on the soybean side? Yeah,
on the soybean side, ending stocks went up to 350 million. We saw little tweaks here in production and supply, demand. But what we learned is while the U.S. market is adequately supplied, the global market, particularly South America, does have plenty of soybeans. So even as the U.S. market, it can get a little bit tighter, some of those exports, there is excess supply in the system, which means soybeans, if the United States does get tight, we can go to 11. Like that's possible, maybe in the low 11s. I think the old highs from this past year around 1140, something like that. But in order to break out over that, you need to have a shortage globally. And right now, that South American crop is still pretty big. USDA did confirm, again, the South American production. So there's no shortage in soybeans. You are seeing a little bit of strength in bean oil. You know, we saw canola go up a little bit. We saw soybean oil increase a little bit. But for soybeans overall, we've got plenty at the moment.
You know, we have seen incredible crush margins over the past couple of years. We've seen some investments in new crush plants. And then as I understand it, we've actually started to export some soybean meal. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes a whole lot of sense that meal is being crushed. And it's going to have to be. And this is something we've been talking about for years. If biodiesel, if renewable biodiesel is going to be part of energy policy here in the United States, we're going to be crushing for oil, which is completely new than it used to be, right? The old saying was, you know, if you want to know what's going on in soybeans, you look at meal because you would only crush for meal. But now we're crushing for oil. But here's the problem with that. We're crushing for the oil, right? Which means we're producing a lot of soybean meal. The meal has to go somewhere. If it's not going to be in the United States, it either has to find a home or it'll go rancid after. You know, it's not storable like the oil is, which means it's got to get into the export market. Now, here's the rub. That means it's got to be priced low enough to compete against corn and the other products. So the meal will move, the meal will find a market at the expense of, unfortunately, lower prices, and it just makes it a little bit more tougher sledding for corn.
For those of us watching this South American crop, and it's in development right now, when does harvest get underway? What should American farmers be paying attention to in Brazil?
Yeah, so the early harvest for soybeans will sometimes happen end of January into February, really February. But then very early harvest, you can start seeing it with the short variety. Okay. But we get into March, April, right? We'll be starting to really see that production come online. It's like the United States. You can have corn in Texas in August, in early August, right? But you go up north, it's gonna be much later, right? Okay. As you go on. Brazil's a massive country, but and that's when you'll see the future spreads trade. You'll see January and March kind of trade like an old crop U.S., but once you get into May and July, you get the added kicker of the South American supply, coming on. Then you can see those spreads act differently.
Lots to watch in the world of agricultural commodities. Craig Turner, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this week.
Thanks for having me.
Agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead.
Well, Greg, as you're watching the forecast for the Pacific Northwest next week, what do you anticipate?
Very little change, and boy, quite a dramatic pattern shift has gone on across the West and the Pacific Northwest over the past couple of weeks from that atmospheric river setup, high snow levels, and that's a problem with regard to potential runoff across parts of California. The snowpack, of course, we'll talk about that in just a minute, but overall stagnant air, you can't move it around and up and off. The temperatures are warm for the time of year. You get the usual nighttime cooling across the valley locale. So after you clear the fog out, a pretty decent go of it with outdoor work for Washington State into Northern California. Along the divide on east, a different story. Those jet stream winds originated across parts of Siberia. They raced down the Canadian Rockies and U.S. Rockies into the deep south, and the end result, you pull those winds across the mountain passes, and they hit 50, 70, 90 miles per hour. And you do get a little snow, and boy, the rapid snowmelt the past couple of weeks, and we'll begin to put that snowpack back into parts of Big Sky Country and the Western Dakotas. That's the story into the early to middle parts of the week. Little change, a little more organization to some snowfall getting going out of Montana into the northern plains states, but little change in weather expected from the divide westward into the northern valleys of California and the Pacific Northwest. Warm, dry environs, offshore flow, Santa Ana, Southern California. A little drabble of snow shower and flow activity across the higher peaks of the central Rockies. Well, the central and southern Rockies hurting with snow cover. Same with the mountains across California. The Sierra Range, only about 50% of normal snow, and it's maybe about 10 inches of water equivalency. So we've got some work to do and some issues already mounting with spring runoff across sections of the southwest. Pretty quiet setup into the central and southern plains into the early to middle parts of the week. Little change across California, the desert southwest, the Four Corners. We do get into a little feed of maybe some west Texas scattered shower activity and a little rain snow mix beginning to get going across parts of the winter wheat belt areas of Nebraska and Kansas.
Does your crystal ball have any snow in it for the central part of the U.S. next week?
It does. So these additional snow showers and flurries, these squalls that make their way through these clipper systems, and here's the next one moving up towards the Sioux, another one out through Big Sky Country. Just put down a little dash of snow shower and flurry activity, but as we saw last week, a rush of wind, a downfall of snow. You get those snow squalls, so we'll keep an eye on that as the week wears on. Lake snows have been pretty substantial into Michigan, northern Indiana, and Ohio, but surprisingly absent any significant snowpack for the time of year across much of the central and southern Corn Belt and the Plain States areas too. And we may begin to add to that here as the weather systems become a little more complex, originating over the southern plains up across the Ohio with the snow rain mix there. The first of probably several more widespread moisture makers going forward. Cold but not terribly bitter western Great Lakes region. Next weather system gathering strength across sections of Big Sky Country and heading to the east and southeast. Here's the dividing line between warmth and the desert southwest. Seasonal temperatures across the central and south end of winter wheat. Some shower activity across the Gulf Coast. Probably some frost and freeze for the northern delta on eastward to start off the week. Had that down through Florida as well. As the week wears on, influx of Gulf moisture in from the south, and the moisture begins to pick up with rain for parts of Texas, the delta, and a rain-snow mix that is for parts of cattle country in through Nebraska and Kansas.
All right, Greg, talk to us about the folks in the eastern third of the country. What are they going to experience next week?
Still some work to do with all that January rain from a dryness and drought standpoint across parts of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. We've seen substantial improvement with these frequent snow and rain systems into the northeast and New England, the bitterest of the cold up towards the Sioux, and a string of these clipper systems adding a little snowfall from time to time and keeping temperatures more typical of January. But the storm track becomes a little more oriented out of the southern plains up across the Ohio, with snow and rain increasing late in the week and the following week in that part of the Corn Belt. Chilly, moisture-laden air for the northeast and New England, the cold up towards the Sioux back on westward, with still some additional snow showers and flurries for the eastern through southern Great Lakes region. Frost and freeze potential, as mentioned, Delta region, I-10 and I-20 corridor, maybe down into areas just south of Orlando. From there on southward, some of those coastal showers continue on. Note the pickup on moisture here as the week wears on over areas from the Delta back in the southeastern parts of the Plain States areas. That winter wheat belt, they'll take the moisture too. Still cool, dry weather for much of the mid-Atlantic region into the northeast and New England. So a more active weather pattern shaping up for cattle country into areas of the Corn Belt as the week wears on. We'll take a look at that 4-week forecast here coming up later on in the broadcast.
Closed captioning this week is brought to you by Farm Progress. Their team of experts reports on innovative solutions and essential information for your farm business. Visit farmprogress.com to stay updated. While China continues to make incremental purchases of U.S. soybeans, leaders of the U.S. Soybean Export Council have continued to look to other markets to find potential. Max Armstrong spoke with board member Reggie Strickland about where that potential could be.
Today, we're looking at markets outside of China because of the issues we've struggled with China over the last 12 months. Our focus has really moved into other areas of the world and to our benefit. Vietnam is a large market for us that has really stepped up in purchasing. And if you look at our sales outside of China, if you look at the rest of the world, our sales outside of China are actually up over 40% year over year. So we're making great strides in other parts of the world.
Can we make up for that Chinese market that is lost? I mean, if we put all of these other markets together, it's a tall challenge, I guess, isn't it?
That's correct, yes, sir. No, we'll never be able to replace China. We need China, to come to the table and take U.S. soy, but so we'll never be able to replace them. But there is a lot of opportunity in other areas of the world that we're hopefully continue to build relationships and build market share.
We hear about trade missions, and this administration talks about its trade missions. You folks at USEC have been involved in those for quite some time, have you not? Yes,
sir. That's where those relationships are built, and that's what it's all about, is the relationship with the people in other parts of the world, and no better way to do that than face-to-face.
You make a great point there on some of the trade missions that I had traveled on as a much younger man. Some of those meetings could go well into the early morning hours, but sitting there face to face, the buyers and you as an American farmer, there's an interesting bond that develops there. Talk about that a bit.
Yes, it is very interesting. I mean, farmers just like myself, we feel like we're only a farmer. I'm just a farmer from North Carolina. But when you get into those meetings, you realize how important it is to be a farmer from North Carolina and be in those conversations, because we need to have that education and share our story. No one knows our story as well as I do my story. Max has his own story. We all have our own stories. But just being able to say it from a U.S. farmer's perspective and share with them all the things that we're doing that we take for granted related to sustainability and just the things that we're doing here that we just take it for granted and we've been doing for generations.
Is it whole soybeans or products that you focus on most?
Both. We're looking whole soybeans and meal because with the new crushing plants coming into the U.S., we're going to have a large supply of meal that we're going to need to find a home for in other parts of the world as well.
What about sustainable fuels in the future? We think about the possibilities here in the United States, but overseas there'll be demand too, will there not?
Yes, sir. Yes, and that's a great market that we need to tap into and a big opportunity for U.S. farmers to be able to supply it moving forward.
It seems exciting. I mean, if that can be developed, there has to be the infrastructure though also, right, Reggie?
That's correct, yes. Yeah, I think that's part of what's lacking and part of, what we're working on.
Quantity is one thing, but quality is another. And it seems like as exporters, we have always been highly regarded in the United States for the quality of products that we produce. Share with us a little bit about how we are seen by overseas customers when it comes to the quality of United States soybeans and soy products.
Yes, sir. That's been remarkable in my travels. In every meeting that you go into, they talk about the quality of U.S. soy. We've sold it over the years, and it's certainly noticed by international buyers. The problem we have is price. So that's a lot of these different parts of the world, they're buying on price even though our quality is much better. It's the bottom line is what they're working on. So we have to be able to differentiate our product and explain to them the importance of the quality and what it really means for feed usage and things such as that.
As a soybean grower, and I know you produce other crops, you're very busy, but you've gotten involved in the soybean associations, and you've become an involved farmer. You believe in your organizations. What do you tell a grower who maybe hasn't gotten engaged, and especially younger producers, who are very busy? They've got a very busy plate. They're raising families. What do you tell them about really supporting their organization?
Yeah, it's very important because just like me, we have to be there and have a seat at the table. As I mentioned earlier, no one knows our story as well as we do. And us being at the table is very important because the number of us is so small. We have to have a seat at the table, and it's very important for the younger generations to get involved and see the importance of what we're doing around the world.
We've focused very much on soybeans and soybean products, but are there some things we've derived from beans? And I think about your involvement in USB and asking this question. Are there some other products outside of food products that overseas customers buy?
Yes, well, it's amazing when you look at the list of things that U.S. soy is used for. Yes, we have a lot of different products that we are involved in that we, the U.S. soy milk. That's one thing that the sustainable soy label we use in other parts of the world. So we're pushing products other than whole soybeans. It's amazing what they're used in.
Sustainability. It seems some parts of the world are hotbeds of interest in sustainability. We typically think of the European nations, for example. The United States, there's been quite a push in that direction. Are there still some countries around the world where sustainability does not matter?
Oh, I think it's become very important in all parts of the world now. As they become more educated and learn more, they understand the importance of sustainability, and then it's become very important all over the world.
Thank you, Max. And folks, leave it here. We'll have more This Week in Agribusiness after this.
Farm Progress Broadcast presents This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry. Brought to you by Pioneer. 100 starts with 1.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to This Week in Agribusiness. Last week was a big week for animal protein as we saw some new nutrition guidelines released from the federal government in addition to passage of the Whole Milk for Healthy Kids Act through Congress. Joining me now to talk about these two moves is Alan Burga. He's the Executive Vice President of Communications with the National Milk Producers Federation. And Alan, you guys have been working on this Whole Milk for Healthy Kids Act for some time. Why does this matter to the dairy industry?
You mean you could argue that we've been working on this since 2010 legislation paved the path for whole milk and 2% milk to be taken out of the National School Meals Program. This was a situation where, based on the nutrition science of the time and some of the concerns of the time, you saw whole milk kind of get caught up in this net of reductions in fat, reductions in saturated fat that took whole milk out of the school lunch program in 2012. Since then, the science has been moving along, and as you take a look at some of the nuances in terms of the role of fat, specifically dairy fats in diets, you saw this movement toward realizing that whole and 2% was a benefit in school meals program. You saw other things as well. Consumer preference has always been for whole and 2% milk, but that has become even more pronounced. Since 2012, it was about 2/3 of demand, and now it's about 4/5 of demand. And then you just take a look at some of the waste issues that were happening in cafeterias where kids weren't drinking milk, and the milk that they were drinking was getting thrown away. So this became a nutrition issue and a school nutrition issue that really cried for a legislative solution. This legislation almost passed Congress in 2023. We were very confident in it in 2025, and sure enough, it was unanimous in both the House and the Senate, and the president signed it to law, at the beginning of January. So there was a lot to celebrate. Honestly, the Whole Milk for Healthy Kids Act was heading just in time to be in front of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, which endorsed whole milk also. So this was a train that was heading to the station from a couple different directions, and we're happy that it is where it is. And as you noted, the next big step is going to be implementation.
Let's get into that a little bit because, of course, these students would love to see additional milk choices in the cafeteria. When can we start to expect that to happen, Alan?
And we're going to do everything we can to help hasten this day, but we also have to take a look at just how the process works, right? I mean, schools sign contracts with dairy processors and dairy providers to provide the milk. A lot of those contracts have been signed. It's for skim and 1%. It's everything from having to print up the boxes that say whole and 2% on them, to getting your stream to be going that way, to making the marketplace work with some of the other demands you have. It's just dollars and cents, basic block and tackle to make this work. So if you expect to see whole milk in your kids' lunch next week at school, you may end up being disappointed. USDA has to be offering rules and working on this. I know it's a priority for them, but the work still has to physically be done. So if there's whole or 2% milk in schools this spring, that's amazing. I would really be looking at this fall, when new contracts are being negotiated, the logistics are being worked with. It's going to vary by processor, it's going to vary by region. What we do know is the law's in place, the momentum is there, the desire is there. This is something that's going to be happening.
All right. Great to see these two things, nutrition guidelines and whole milk for healthy kids, across the finish line. What's next for the National Milk Producers Federation, Alan, before we let you go?
Well, as we've noted, implementation of this is going to be a very big deal. And on the nutrition front, we're taking a look at that. And of course, we're continuing, our campaign for integrity and labeling on plant-based beverages. But I also think we need to pivot, and noting that whole milk is also helpful toward this. We also have to be looking at the economic circumstances in dairy country right now. Margins are low, DMC payments are out. Whole milk actually will help clear some of the butterfat demand, but there's going to be a lot to be working on in 26.
It's going to be a struggle, but dairy farmers are tough. Alan Bjerga, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier returns now with his extended farm weather forecast for the country.
Earlier in the program, Greg, you mentioned there might be some scattered moisture next week. Who's going to see the bulk of that?
It'll be just that to start off, but as the week wears on, we'll begin to build it into a couple of areas. First over the Gulf Coast and back into the southern plains, some of the drier areas of the winter wheat belt. Winter wheat surprisingly overwintering relatively well, considering the lack of moisture and protective moisture at that in the way of snow cover. But as the week wears on, we'll look for maybe a mixture of moisture to get going. First rain, maybe some ice, back over to snow in the other direction, the Ohio into areas of Oklahoma, the dividing line. Probably more organization late in the week to some snowfall for parts of the Corn Belt locales. We'll get some moisture down through Florida, the Gulf Coast, maybe a little bit back into parts of the Rio Grande and sections of the southwestern reaches of the country, but much of the Pacific West, high and dry weather. That will continue on here as we move forward over the next week to 10 days.
What are you watching from a temperature perspective as January comes to a close?
We continue to watch what we call stratospheric warming. When the uppermost level of the atmosphere begins to warm, that tells us that cold air, Arctic air, polar air is on the move, and it will tend to kind of warble around, rotate across the Canadian prairie, back to Hudson Bay, James Bay, the North Atlantic, then come right back around again. But as we head through the beginning part of February, this is the story, and we're going to make up for that very mild month of December. Cold here, bitter cold up north of the Lakes region, and warmth over the southwestern reaches of the country, but it bodes a pretty active weather pattern with really fast-moving clipper systems that tend to get wound up over the Great Lakes, but out of the Pacific Northwest, they'll welcome the snow there, and increasing snowpack and snowfall across much of the northern and eastern Corn Belt into the northeast of New England and much of the southwestern reaches of the country, per usual for La Nina, left high and dry.
Any big changes in that temperature outlook as we get to that first full week in February?
As we see it right now from a temperature standpoint, here it is. And boy, the groundhog will be shivering away with a pretty good shot of cold air all the way west of the divide, down into parts of the winter wheat belt. We got to keep an eye on the lack of snow cover there across much of the northeast of New England. A little sliver of warmth over the southeastern reaches of the country, but still a pretty busy weather pattern when you get the trough over the middle part of the country. Here it is. So snows pick up in the Pacific Northwest, the Great Plains, and a pretty active, if not stormy, weather pattern for the first full complete week of the month of February over and through much of the Corn Belt.
As we get into the week of February 9th through the 15th, of course, we'll be in Louisville for the National Farm Machinery Show. Greg, how does it look?
From a temperature standpoint, we think kind of getting better. The cold air moderates some. We'll see temperatures back to normal around and through the Ohio Valley at Louisville. The warmth over the southwestern reaches of the country. The storm track, though, is still busy out of the Pacific Northwest, northern and central plains, and across a wide area of the Corn Belt.
Our Farm Progress Update is brought to you by Grinnell Mutual. Farming is complicated. Our comprehensive policies make it simpler. Protect your tomorrow from the unexpected with Grinnell Mutual. For a lot of you folks involved with commodity groups or policy associations in agriculture, this is meeting season. And our colleagues at Farm Progress are trying to hit as many of those meetings as they can. Prairie Farmer editor Holly Spangler had the chance to go to the Illinois Farm Bureau meeting this past year where there was a lot up for discussion. Holly, there was an election that grabbed a lot of headlines. Fill us in on what changed with the Illinois Farm Bureau.
Yeah, absolutely. Illinois Farm Bureau held their annual meeting about a month ago, early December in Chicago, and there was a big election. And they have an election for their president and vice president every 2 years. That was this year, and Brian Duncan was the current president coming in running for re-election, and Philip Nelson, a past president, was running against him. And so it created a lot of campaigning through the fall. As those guys kind of went through, here are our different positions, and they were pretty clear.
Okay, and I understand there was a lot of controversy in the Illinois Farm Bureau throughout last year. There was an attempt made to separate whether or not people needed to pay for Farm Bureau memberships to buy insurance. Holly, how has that progressed? What do we know today?
Yeah, a little over a year ago, the Country Financial Board, which is an affiliate of Illinois Farm Bureau, voted to no longer require an associate member of those folks who are buying insurance who are not farmers. So that would reduce the Illinois Farm Bureau membership rolls pretty significantly, and has in several ways since then. And in part, it was the way that was rolled out. I think a lot of the grassroots folks in the county didn't feel like they had a voice. They didn't get to vote on that. They didn't get to weigh in on it. It was never a discussion point. And I would say they revolted, right? And really pushed Philip Nelson forward to run against Brian Duncan and to get this reversed.
So Philip Nelson did win the election. It was close, but he ended up as the victor. And so has that unwound those policies under Brian Duncan's term, or is that discussion still left to be had?
That discussion is definitely still ongoing. We're talking about two different boards, right? And as it's always been explained to me, the folks who are elected to serve on the Illinois Farm Bureau Board also serve on the Country Financial Board, but they put on a different hat, right, when they switch over to that country board. And so they put on the fiduciary hat then, and they act like an insurance company. And so typically what happens after the election is they would, those folks who are defeated, so that would include Brian Duncan, and there were, I believe, 4 district directors who were defeated. Again, people ran against them because of this situation. They resigned, of course, from their seats on the Illinois Farm Bureau Board. They have not resigned their seats on the Country Financial Board, which is, from what I understand, kind of typically what would happen.
Okay, so there is that back and forth that will continue to play out. And of course, being as it's Illinois Farm Bureau, Prairie Farmer covering all of agriculture as it relates to Illinois. Holly, you'll continue to keep an eye on this issue as it plays out over the remainder of the year, I imagine.
We will. We'll keep an eye on it and keep sharing as much as we can, and have stories on prairiefarmer.com as frequently as is necessary.
Bookmark that page, folks, prairiefarmer.com. Holly Spangler, executive editor at Farm Progress, editor at Prairie Farmer. Thank you so much for joining us and filling us in as to what's happening on the ground in Illinois.
You bet. Thanks so much, Mike.
Now, on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, where we spotlight another great American farm tractor. Well, I guess it wouldn't be too big of a surprise that somewhere over the course of a nearly 90-year-old tractor life, there might be a mishap. I'll share the story in Max's Tractor Shed. It's brought to you by the folks at Ag Spray Equipment, a leader in liquid application equipment and parts, and the home of the DT Series trailer. From turnkey solutions to field-proven performance, they help maximize your spraying operation. Learn more at agspray.com. Well, many old tractors somewhere along the long life had some kind of an accident. Well, there was an occasion when I got within inches. My front wheels on my Super H came within inches of the back bumper of a squad car, but that's a story for another day. Howard Heminger in New York has the story of his F-14 Farmald. Take a look at what happened on a day in the 40s. Howard Sr. didn't know that F-14 was still in gear when he went to crank it. So the tractor lunged forward. Howard was able to get out of the way. It went through the end of the barn. Looks like it took out a window when it did so. But it did a lot of work over the years. That F-14, made in 1938, cultivating corn, kidney beans, carrots, beets, and cabbage. The cultivator for it got scrapped somewhere along the line. However, Howard Heminger told me he was able to get another one and restored it superbly, as you can tell. That tractor stands tall today. Howard Heminger says there have been 6 generations of his family that have been on that seat at some time or another at Geneva, New York. Here's Mark Stocknow with his weekend report from Big Iron Auctions.
Well, hello, Max. As we get into 2026, quality equipment, quality land, selling for premium prices. This week on Tuesday, January the 20th, the Jeff Browner Estate sale will feature a 2023 Massey Ferguson Heston MC 1393 Razor Edge Mower Conditioner, International LT 625 Day Cab Semi-Truck Tractors, Mauer Hopper Bottom Grain Trailers, John Deere and Case IH Tractors, Case 750M Dozer CX80C Mini Excavator. On Wednesday, January the 21st, Belltown Farms Hudson LLC John Deere S780 Combine, 2019 year model Case IH Steiger 620 Quad Track. There's a John Deere 1725 Stack Fold 16-row 30 Planter. There are 2 2021 John Deere 8R 340 mechanical front tractors. This is a very big late model farm machinery equipment auction. On Thursday, January the 22nd, Daybreak Farms Inc., another outstanding lineup of machinery selling on a retirement auction. They have 2 combines. They will sell their GMC Sierra C700 tandem axle grain trucks. Tractors include a John Deere 8320 mechanical front, 1998 John Deere 8400 mechanical front. For details on these upcoming auctions, or if you're planning an auction, visit bigiron.com.
Our FFA Chapter Tribute is brought to you by Gehringoff. Check out the new XFR50 Draper with 3 times more flexibility than the closest competitor at Gehringoff.com. Gehringoff, proudly built in the American heartland. This week, we're getting to know William Rogers. He's serving as the Michigan State FFA Vice President for this year. And William, thanks for taking the time to join us this week.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your background. Did you grow up in an agricultural environment?
Yeah, so I come from a farm family. While my parents did not own a full-size farm, we did grow up raising different kinds of animals like sheep and cattle. And I started my own pumpkin growing business where I farmed pumpkins and popcorn and different stuff like that.
All right. So what was it that made you interested in FFA? Why'd you join?
I actually joined because my ag teacher came to my classroom and started telling us how we could raise chickens as part of a contest. And I thought, well, if I got to do chickens in school, that sounds pretty good to me. And that's how I heard about it.
And then, of course, through your time in FFA, it looks like you've been very involved in leadership at the chapter, now, of course, at the state level. What is it about leadership that appeals to you, William?
One thing I really like about leadership is the ability to inspire others and make them feel like they can accomplish their own goals and feel like, you know, they have something special to put forward. So that's why I like being a leader, so I can help others find their own path.
That's incredible. Looking out longer term, do your future plans have you staying in agriculture?
Yeah, so I want to be a lot of different things involved in agriculture. I possibly want to be an agriculture education teacher. I want to farm, and I also want to own my own ag business and take over my family business.
Well, I wish you the best of luck, William. With all of those things, we need good folks in every one of those roles throughout agriculture. So thanks for taking the time to fill us in this week.
Thank you.
Chad Colby's Tech segment is brought to you by AGI, supporting your expertise with industry-leading grain handling, storage, conditioning, and monitoring solutions. AGI, we're right there with you. Chad Colby doesn't miss many reveals of brand new technology, and he'll be in Central Illinois next week to get the dive on what's to come from a prominent company.
If you've been farming for very long, the chances are you're very familiar with precision planting and how their winter conference has become a key part of winter planning for many operations. For nearly 25 years, this event has helped farmers prepare for spring with practical, real-world information that they can apply on their operations. This year's conference takes place live at the home of precision planting in Tremont, Illinois next week, January 20th through the 23rd. Growers can also attend thanks to some great technology from multiple locations across the United States and Canada, making it easier than ever to participate. One area that's got a lot of attention the last couple years at precision planting is radical agronomics. This is precision planting's approach to modernizing soil fertility. It's designed to simplify soil sampling, speed up the nutrient analysis, and deliver more accurate data to support better decisions and updating a process that really hasn't changed much in decades. And if you have missed the latest news from precision planting at the two big shows recently, the Farm Progress Show or at Agritechnica, this conference is a great opportunity to get all caught up. And speaking of new technology, I was also told this week to expect a couple major announcements, including one for your planter and another for your sprayer. That fits right in with precision planting's long-standing philosophy of helping farmers get more out of the equipment and systems they already own through smart upgrades and retrofit. This is definitely one event that belongs on your calendar. I'm going to be there next Tuesday, and I cannot wait to see the latest technology. To learn more about the event and get signed up, go to their website, precisionplanting.com. For This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Chad Colby.
Thanks, Chad, for that update. It's incredible to see the kind of innovations that can start out in farm shops that now are spread across farms all over this country. Earlier in the program, market analyst Craig Turner was talking about the current supply situation in the world of soybeans, and we have ample stocks globally, but it's not catastrophic. However, he did say the market would certainly reward a weather scare somewhere. Now, it's a long time before we'll get a weather scare here in North America, but in South America, those crops are actively growing. Ag meteorologist Greg Solier keeps track about what's developing in the weather world around the globe. And Greg, as you take a look at Argentina, one of the large growers down there in South America, how does that growing season look so far?
It generally has improved, unfortunately, down there, or fortunately, depending on your perspective of things. It was first some dryness-related issues, then temperature. Both here over the past week to 10 days have kind of remedied themselves. It's short-term. We'll have to keep an eye on what La Nina has to do down the line here. But in the meantime, showers widespread around La Pampa, for example, Buenos Aires, Cordoba, a little still on the drier side. Everyone else, the usual wide spectrum like we see here in the summertime of rainfall amounts and coverages. Temperatures were the story. They have trended a bit below average now, easing up on some of the mid and upper 90-degree heat they had across interior sections there. And so far, corn and soybeans, 90 to 92% planted. Winter wheat harvest is winding on down. So again, it's all up to La Nina, how it plays out here in the coming weeks with regard to their harvest going forward here. But right now, not any of the greatest weather news to offer up down there to getting some sense of a weather rally going in that particular part of the world.
Any different stories as you look no farther north into Brazil? Are they having any challenges that could perhaps provide a market pop?
They were into the early start of their growing season and planting season. But again, widespread and persistent rains have come back into some of the drier reaches of Brazil, especially central and eastern areas. Generally a tenth to a half, some spots up to an inch, and pretty decent coverages the past week to 10 days down there. Some of the drier areas off east where we've had some heat as well. So it may be in that northeastern section of Brazil that are a little more worrisome with regard to crop development. Overall, though, Mato Grosso do Sul, Rio Grande do Sul, scattered showers there generally into the quarter-inch category. And again, a little more inconsistent with regard to precipitation there. Now, temperatures going forward into Brazil, they're back to more seasonal norms. We had a lot of those areas across some of the mid-belt areas that were in the upper 90s, low 100s, even in the domestic scene, that's a problem. And for some of those drier areas it was, but again, they had some significant rains of late. Paraná, 93% of that first crop and 86% of the soybeans are now in the reproductive stage. Rio Grande do Sul, soybean planting 96% complete there. So overall, things are looking good, unfortunately, as it applies to Brazil and Argentina going forward.
All right, we'll see how that La Nina plays out throughout harvest. Greg, thank you so much for joining us this week here at the desk. And thank you for taking the time to join us here. Be sure to catch us next time right here for This Week in Agribusiness. Have a great week, everybody. This Week in Agribusiness is recorded in the Strauss Studio. Family owned since 1948 and trusted by pros worldwide, Strauss makes gear that works as hard as you do. Tough, functional, and resilient. This isn't just workwear, it's gear engineered to perform. Gear up now at Strauss.com.
This Week in Agribusiness is produced by 22 Creative Group and has been a presentation of Farm Progress Broadcast. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.